Thanks for listening to High Education. I'm Amelia Day, lifetime educator and weed enthusiast recording from my studio apartment. Today I'm joined by my producer Nick. We will be discussing what trauma-informed instruction is, why we need it, and what classrooms are most affected by student trauma.
What is trauma-informed instruction?
Trauma-informed instruction is guidelines for teachers to use when they are deciding what to do in the classroom. Trauma, as we all know, is anytime something bad happens to us. There's physical trauma. If you break your bone or you bruise yourself, that's a form of trauma. And then there's also emotional trauma that can occur if there's abuse or bullying happening for the child. Then there's social trauma, same difference really is emotional, so on and so on. So trauma informed instruction basically says that we as teachers see that our students are coming to us traumatized by their backgrounds and that we need to inform our instruction based on this information. Now, that's the basic overview of it, but we need to go a little bit deeper in order to understand what it's really telling us. So, I don't know if you guys have heard of trauma informed instruction before, but I'm going to go on the basis that you know little to nothing. So, if you know something already, sorry, I'm speaking for the beginners out there. Um, Trauma informed instruction tells us that when a student becomes overwhelmed by extreme emotions, like any of us would if they're put in unsafe situations over and over and over again, their brains form connections that lead to flight, fight, or freeze. Now, we can call that flipping our lid. That's kind of like the layman's term. When you go into that mode, um, and it's our biology. It's how we have adapted to save ourselves back whenever we had to really save ourselves from wild animals or war. That was something that everyone had to deal with. Um, Anyways, so when a student flips their lid or goes into flight, fight, or freeze, they are not able to think rationally. Think about yourself at your most upset. Okay, you're really angry. Something terrible has happened. What it happens to you? Well, what happens to me is I kind of freeze up and my body starts trembling a little bit and I start looking for escape routes. I start thinking about how much bigger the people are around me, how much stronger are they? And it's not even something I'm doing consciously. It's just what I am doing subconsciously because I'm feeling unsafe or very angry in that moment. I am not making great decisions. I'm not like having a great debate with this person. I am probably arguing, saying unkind things. Okay. Now imagine you're a child and you just saw something extremely traumatizing. Okay. So your brain is forming that connection to flight, fight, or freeze a lot in your home environment or your neighborhood environment or whatever environment that is exposing you to that trauma. And so your brain is making those connections really easily now. And so you don't know who you can trust at this point anymore. You go to school and you see this adult who's an authority over you and can make any decision they want, basically, and you have to follow through with the directions. Well, that's not going to feel safe to someone who's had trauma. So they're already in a little bit of a heightened state. Hopefully, you've created an environment where they can feel that, okay, this person might have authority over me, but I feel comfortable. But not everyone's lucky enough to connect with their traumatized students on such a deep level. So there's the cases where that doesn't happen. All right, so they are now going to make that connection, flipping their lid or going to flight, fight, or freeze over things that seem trivial to you. Like, please finish up your assignment before you turn it in. I know you want to play with your friends, but you have to finish these two problems first. Okay. You or I or a regulated child would be like, okay, I'm going to get these two problems. Even if I get them wrong, I'm just going to write something down so I can get out and play with my friends. No, this kid says, "Oh my god, this person is controlling me. They are not listening to my needs. And they just become more and more and more dysregulated. They flip their lid. And before you know it, they've flipped a table, or they have struck you, or they have cursed you out. And you're like, what is wrong with this child? Nothing. There's nothing wrong with this child. Their brain made the connection that is easiest for them. And so that is basically the underlying reason why we need trauma informed instruction, because that's the connections that our students are making with their brain. And so we know enough, thanks to science, to know that this is happening now. Now, we are already in a better position than some of our older peers who didn't understand why their children were acting out. They just saw these behaviors and had no idea what was causing it. Well, we're in the better position because we know what's causing it. And now science is giving us not blueprints exactly, but best practices that we know are helpful for our students who are in these situations. De escalation strategies, giving our students choices as much as possible, tying back their education to things that seem practically important to them. So that way they don't feel controlled. They see you as someone who's there to help them get to the best life they can have. The more that you can connect with your students and make those connections between what they're learning and what is going on in their lives, the more easily they can see the importance of doing those two problems before going and playing. These children are capable of rational thought. They just need practice. And they also need our empathy. As adults, we need to see how powerless they must feel when they feel unsafe a lot of the time. And so, trauma informed practice or trauma informed instruction gives us the tools that, as teachers, we require in order to do what is best for our traumatized students.
Why do we need trauma informed instruction?
Well, I kind of touched on this with your last question. Our students are coming to us from traumatized homes, or not necessarily their homes, but just with trauma in their background. So we are dealing with a nation that is not acknowledging that we have problems. It's coming down from the top leaders down. And so when we look at what is happening in any one community, obviously there's going to be differences between my town and your town if you're across the country from me. We're a big country. But I mean, I feel like some problems are universal. And so we have just a shit economy at the moment. Even when it's at its greatest, can we all acknowledge that for the bottom like 30% of America, it's shit economy no matter what economy it is? Okay, let's all agree on that. And that's what 30% of our students are coming to us with. Now, imagine just slightly better than that. So we are coming, or our students are coming to us from all different backgrounds. And so we have different forms of trauma happening in these students' lives. They might be experiencing homelessness. They might be experiencing food shortages. They might be experiencing, oh, they have a home, but there's not air conditioning, any heat. So just the scarcity of resources. Then we've got negligence in the homes. We've got parents who are working their asses off and can't catch a break. And so, like, if they were to pay for childcare, it would bankrupt them. They might as well just not have a job at that point. So, what do? Like, you put your 10-year-old daughter in charge of your 6-year-old and 2-year-old daughters. That's what you do because you have to pay the bills and you have to feed these hungry mouths. So there's negligence, and it's not always done willfully or purposely. Then you've got straight up abuse. There's emotional, there's physical, there's sexual, you name it. And so we as educators need trauma informed instruction because we are not currently trained on how to help students who are coming from these backgrounds. When we are going through our undergraduate degree program, we are given the numbers, we are told what it's like, but there's a difference between living it and just seeing the numbers. And I think that's why the nation is not acting as quickly as they need to address these social issues. Um, and so, what I'm saying is, teachers are not receiving the knowledge that they need in order to know what to do when Johnny gets so angry he flips a desk, or to know what to do when another student comes in with obvious signs of either self harm or physical abuse. Or what about the ones who are quietly letting, or not letting, but it's quietly happening to them and you're not even aware? Okay, so we're not giving the tools. And so trauma informed instruction, this is not new, but it's newly becoming more prominently taught through professional development inside classrooms or inside schools. And so I think that's a great thing. And the reason why we need it is because if we don't understand how to see the whole child rather than the child who's here just for academics, if we don't acknowledge that that student is coming to us with open wounds, then we are never going to educate that child. We are just going to either trickle them into the prison system, we are going to fail them completely and allow them to become homeless as well. We're going to give them such a negative mindset of themselves that they don't see that they can overcome these issues. So we need trauma informed instruction in order to reach our most worthy, most traumatized kids who literally have no one else rooting for them or trying to help them.
What classrooms are most affected by students who have had trauma in their background?
Well, I mean, that sounds like a easier question from like the outside because obviously the students who are receiving the trauma the most are the students who are coming from homes that are lower in the socioeconomic status. And we know the reasons why this is happening. The same regulation issues that we are seeing in our students, our young students and older ones, are coming and being taught to them by their families. And it's because generational poverty is a thing, generational abuse is a thing. We need to start acknowledging that. We need to start, as a society, providing resources for newly impregnated or newly parented families because they don't know. They are not armed with the knowledge of what happened to them. They think that this is normal life. They might know that, oh, I would never treat someone I love that way, but I mean, that's how my family treated me, so it must be normal. Or they know it's wrong, but they just don't have the coping mechanisms that they need in order to handle a 4-year old's temper tantrum. Because I don't know if you've been around small children, but they can say some very cruel things when they're angry and dysregulated. And so we know that it's happening in these high poverty, high stress situations because the people who are impoverished are also oftentimes the most stressed out population. And that makes sense because they're trying to pay their bills, they're trying to feed their family, they're trying to stay regulated, their boss is an asshole. Like there's a list and a list and a list and a list, and you're like, stay positive. We live in America. You can rise up. And they're like, I'm trying, I'm working my ass off. How do I get there? They just, they're getting more and more frustrated. And so obviously the schools who are servicing these populations are going to be the ones that are more heavily impacted by um, traumatized students, and they're probably going to have more of them because if you're in a wealthy district, well, all of the homes around you that are tunneling their students into the school are also going to be the highly um, wealthy families. And so they are going to be providing nannies, they're going to be providing horseback riding and all these enriching programs. And I'm not saying that's bad. I love that. I wish every child got that. So don't feel guilty if you're a mama out there listening. Like you do you, take care of that kid and don't feel guilty. But the truth is, those schools are going to have a lower population of students who are traumatized. And so they're going to be able to take in like the 1 or 2% who come in with dysregulation issues, whether they receive trauma in a different location or it's some type of just a mental disability that causes regulation issues. They're going to be surrounded by their peers who are all highly regulated. And so they're going to be able to flourish. The classroom's going to be better because they will have at least a little bit more diversity in regulation ability. So that's going to be an excellent environment. Um, and then you have the schools where they don't have enough teachers because they don't have enough funding. There's class sizes 30, 40. You put into the mix about 5%, 10% of those kiddos have regulation issues for whatever reason. Well, good luck having one teacher and one teacher's assistant taking care of that high number of traumatized students because there's going to be regulation issues and they're going to see their peers being dysregulated, which is going to increase the trauma, which is going to trigger their dysregulation. So it's just like a never ending cycle. So obviously, our classrooms that are underfunded because of how crappily our schools are funded are going to be more heavily impacted. Now, the reason why it's not as easy is because there's a lot of factors that I am probably unaware of, as well as factors that are kind of complicated that cause certain classrooms to be more affected by trauma. Obviously, if you have a teacher who's burned out, that classroom is going to be more affected by trauma. So having teachers who have been in the field for too long because retirement age is getting further and further away, that's an issue that could increase the effects. Another is having teachers who are undereducated on this issue, having teachers who are biased against the student for whatever reason, having teachers who are new to the field and don't have experience to pull back from. Now, that's not to stereotype all new teachers. There are some amazing first year teachers out there who like do crazy amazing things. So I'm not saying if you're a new teacher you're automatically failing at this. I'm saying that there is something to be said of having experience with students who are coming to us with these issues. And if you've never dealt with it and it's your first year and you're trying to impress everyone around you, that's a lot of pressure. So you just have to consider the stress factor for the teachers as well. Um, Besides that, you've got communities who handle schooling differently. So, like, I've the last district I worked at, the PTA was amazing. They were highly involved. The parents were highly involved in the students' lives. Like, even though they were impoverished, these families really like cared. But then you look at my first school district, and I was lucky to have 3 parents show up to parent teacher conference night. Like, so there's just the discrepancy in involvement of the community, and that's going to affect how the students feel inside the classroom. So there's a lot more factors than what I touched on, and I want you to realize that. But the biggest predictor of trauma and the biggest predictor of issues with trauma is always going to be financial, unfortunately. And so that's why I felt I should give you a simplistic answer that is easy based on the biggest factor.
How can we improve our implementation of trauma informed instruction?
We can improve our implementation of trauma informed instruction in classrooms from all levels. It can trickle down basically from the top, where if we can educate our policymakers on best practices and explain, give data, giving you case studies showing how trauma informed instruction actually helps inside the classroom to raise test scores. It actually helps to improve the classroom culture. It does wonders for all students, not just your students who are living in trauma, which we know is growing, especially with coronavirus, especially with everything that's going on with Black Lives Matters. We know that the trauma that these students are receiving is just increasing at this point, and it was already considered the number one factor that the CDC was concerned about. And so um, we know that we can improve it by educating our policymakers. If we can get our policymakers to understand the importance of trauma informed instruction, they will see the need to fund our classrooms, our schools to be able to implement this type of instruction well. And they will probably, I mean, it's already happening. They're already creating social and behavioral or social and emotional learning standards, and it's starting to pop up in different states. I know that it's already happening in Washington. It's coming to Oregon probably fairly soon. So like, these policies, they are already in motion. It's just getting the right people to make it happen faster. Because the state is taking the initiative at this point, whereas we need the nation to take the initiative. Um, Now, it's talking from a district level or a school level. The principal can provide professional development for teachers to become educated in trauma informed instruction, because we know that not all teachers, not even the majority of teachers, are well informed and well taught on this subject. I didn't learn any of this until I entered my master's program 3 years after. I mean, yeah, 3 years after my first day in the classroom. So I could have been using this information from the day I graduated with my teaching degree, but they didn't provide it to me. And I think that in itself is the biggest mistake any educational program can make, is just not arming our students with, I mean, our teachers with the tools that we need to help our students. Because as we know, if our students are not regulated, they are not learning. So by providing our schools with professional development, now I'm not talking about seminars that you sit in for one day. I'm talking about book studies. I'm talking about observations. I'm talking about mentorship between our master teachers and our teachers who need development. I'm talking about systematic change that actually supports change, because as we know, intellectual development is at a different level than action development, and what you understand intellectually can oftentimes be difficult to connect to your actions. And so they need scaffolding as teachers on this. So having the right leaders take the initiative is going to be essential. Um, from there, as from the teacher level, there are definitely things we can be doing to improve our classrooms using this type of instruction. It can inform our discipline plans, because we need to consider the purpose of discipline when creating our behavior management systems. Anna Berardi and Brenna Morton said in Trauma Informed School Practice, Building Expertise to Transform School, systems that use punitive responses to students' behaviors in an effort to help the child learn to make a different choice next time are ineffective, because they assume that the child knows of a more appropriate response and chose not to use it, and that the punishment will encourage a better choice next time. We also pointed out that because trauma informed does not mean giving children a free pass when they violate the norms of our classroom, um, or schools. So that is them basically saying, like, even though we see their trauma, we're not giving them out to behave whichever way they want. We need to have behavior management systems. We need to have classroom expectations, but we also need to inform these expectations based on our students. And studies show that students with trauma in their backgrounds don't learn from punishment. So instead, we should view disruptions in the classroom due to behavior issues as learning opportunities. We could take the time to use our relationships with our students and those who are regulated or dysregulated to actually teach a social emotional lesson, providing coping strategies and conflict resolution techniques. Because, as we know, trauma informed instruction never harms a student. They're not harmed if they are not traumatized and they receive this type of instruction. It actually helps them because they start to develop self awareness. They start to monitor their emotions and the corresponding behaviors. They become metacognitive about what is going on with their emotions. And we provide them a sense to practice agency, which will set them towards a path of regulation for their future, even if they're not fully regulated today. And that's why Zero to Three, a nonprofit organization, suggests that you adopt a universal approach where you assume all children are trauma affected and need social and emotional learning, instruction, and support. So you can teach these skills. There's different programs out there that are free or very inexpensive that you could just add on 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day. Like these type of lessons, these type of expectations inside the classroom, they can make a world of difference for our students who really are not being reached in other ways. And as we know, with the hierarchy of needs, if we are not providing the sense of safety, the sense of community for our students, if we are not providing them with shelter and their basic needs, they're not going to achieve enlightenment. They're not going to achieve their full potential no matter what. So, by taking the time to provide lessons for social emotional learning to inform our instruction based on their backgrounds, based on their trauma, we are going to see better results, both behaviorally and academically.
What are some examples of situations teachers might find themselves in where trauma informed instruction could help?
Well, let me tell you about a 7-year-old student who's living in a suburban classroom. He has withstood severe trauma in the form of physical and mental abuse from his father, and also witnessing that same abuse happening to his mom. Now, recently, this kiddo's dad also passed away from a heart attack. So while he's not currently going through the abuse, he has it in his mind, as well as the fresh wound of losing a parental figure. Um, so he has also been labeled within the school as a behavior challenge. So like, you know how you kind of talk about your students, just trying to get like different perspectives from other teachers, just trying to get some help. Like, how can I do better for this student? And so despite the fact that his teachers truly care about him and want what is best for him, he has been subconsciously labeled a behavior challenge. And so, even though it's never been said in front of him, it's never even been said out loud, it's been implied, and it's affected his sense of self worth, especially inside schools. So he comes to school one day to find that his teacher is not going to be able to be there. And in her place is the student teacher. Now, he's kind of familiar with the student teacher. They worked together for a couple weeks now, but he can sense that the student teacher is nervous around him. So when he sees that his teacher's not in the room, he's already triggered a little bit. And you can tell because he slams his breakfast down on the table. And so the student teacher takes the initiative at this point, having also talked with the teacher prior to the teacher's absence to get some advice. And she sits down to have a conversation with the student before his peers enter the classroom. And she's like, hey, I know this is unusual, and I want you to know that your teacher has told me that it's completely fine if you want to tell me a message you want me to give her, or even for you to call her using my phone. You can come to me during your morning recess, your lunch, or your afternoon recess. Those are all great times if you want me to get a message to her. And for those of you who are worried about giving your phone number to a substitute or giving it to a student, there are apps out there that protect your personal information. You can contact your students using it, but you can also have complete control of turning it off, and it won't ring, but you'll still get your normal phone calls. So you still have the chance to disengage from work. Um, so the student teacher has already given that student a tool to kind of embrace, because students who have traumatic backgrounds don't do well when there's not predictability. They don't do well if there's a change in the routine unless they are given certain supports. So by providing him with that support, the student teacher and teacher have already done everything that they can to give him the tools he needs. So later that day, he becomes obviously agitated due to an unpreferred activity he's asked to do. And the teacher can like visibly see him about to flip his lid. And so, what can the student teacher do at that point to de escalate the situation? Well, Jessica Minahan states in trauma informed teaching strategies, the teacher is 50% of every interaction with the student. By changing the way we give a direction or respond, we can reduce problematic behaviors. So, um, like when the student teacher starts to see him flipping his lid, the student teacher could come up to him and say, hey, I notice that you have started pinching yourself. Would you like to go to the peace corner? Well, you're providing the student at that moment an out. You're providing them the chance to get away from his anxiety or from his anger or whatever strong emotion he's feeling, and just cool off without causing a scene with his peers. And so that in itself could be enough to save the day, quote unquote, um, from preventing another traumatic event in this poor traumatized student's life, as well as traumatizing his peers. Um, but let's say that's not enough. Let's say the student refuses that option and continues to dysregulate. Well, the student teacher can at that point give another chance, just give them another out, because you can't reason with a student who's slipping their lid, as we know. So by giving that student another out by saying, hey, do you want to go get a drink of water right now? And we can talk about this when you get back. You're giving them a chance to, like, you showing them that you trust them, A, and you're giving them a chance to re-regulate privately. And so at that point, if the student chooses to go get a drink of water, the student teacher could also call the principal or the counselor or whoever her backup is and ask for some support with the student, um, totally without the student knowing, and just like providing an additional level of support. Now, let's say that's not enough. The student is so upset at this point that he cannot even like identify an out when it's given to him. So he just flat out refuses. Well, the viable option left for the student teacher is a room clear. Now, some schools have done this really cool thing where they have like different loop-de-loops or different like calls to actions in the hallway for just some physical activity. Students are given this as a break option, as a reward, just whatever, just to get the wiggles out, you know. And so by telling her students, hey, go in the hallway and do this workout routine, and if you finish, do it again, like that just gets them out of the classroom, provide some privacy for the de-escalated student while also ensuring that the students aren't freaked out by his behavior. And the student teacher at that point can start using some of her de-escalation strategies to try and calm the student down. She has taken the danger away by taking the peers out of the room, and she is now going to provide very simple, concise instructions to the student so that way he can comprehend what she's saying. Because, as we all know, when you flip your lid, you lose a lot of your comprehension, your ability to think rationally is just out the window. So, by repetitively saying, when you are calm, I will know because you will be in the peace corner, or put the chair down, find a safe place, sit down, and breathe. Now, it's very important. The tone of voice that you use at this point is essential, because if you use a negative or a stern voice, you're going to make the child feel like they're out of control still, or like you're trying to control them. Don't use a positive voice. We don't want them to think that this is a positive interaction. We want to avoid this ever happening again. So using that neutral voice kind of helps the student and yourself. Once the student has calmed down and is in that position that you instructed, you can start using I statements to summarize what you observe. Like, I noticed when I asked you to do this activity, you became upset. And I think you might be upset because I saw you pick up a chair. Do you want to tell me if I'm missing something? Or just asking for their perspective will allow them to kind of give you advice, maybe on how to avoid that situation or how to handle that situation maybe a little better in the future if for some reason it happens again. Now, the child's not off the hook. They're not going to walk away from this happening without something happening, like a consequence. But now is not the time to enforce that consequence. Now is relationship building. Okay, so at this point, all the student teacher is doing is talking with them, remaining calm, um, encouraging the student to stay calm. And once they have made it clear that they can have a conversation with you, then you can invite the other students back into the classroom and thank them for their patience and provide them with a calming activity such as a guided meditation, a calm go noodle, a coloring page, anything to get them back into that unheightened state. So, in my mind, this is how you would integrate trauma informed instruction in a highly escalated situation. If you enjoyed what we talked about, be sure to like and subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. Proceeds from this episode will be donated to Save the Children. You can learn more about how to support us and what we talked about today by visiting us at highedpod.com.